This podcast was recorded and provided by the National Association of Regional Councils. For more information about NARC, please visit narc.org.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the podcast. I'm Valerie Hermanson with the National Association of Regional Councils. As part of the U.S. Department of Energy's Sunshot Solar Outreach Partnership, we are working with our partners at the International City County Management Association, the American Planning Association, and ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, to support local governments in increasing solar deployment in their communities nationwide. Today, I am joined by Helen Aki, Energy Program Coordinator at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, or MAPC, located in Boston, Massachusetts. Helen has been with MAPC since 2010. She works to develop and implement the energy-related services that the agency provides and to provide clean energy-related technical assistance and expertise as needed. Helen is here today to discuss how MAPC is working to make the Boston region a leader in solar development and opportunities. Thank you so much for joining us today, Helen. Can you give us a quick description of MAPC's role as the regional planning organization for the greater Boston region?
Yeah, definitely, and thanks for having me. We definitely appreciate the opportunity to talk about our work. So MAPC is the regional planning agency serving 101 cities and towns in the greater Boston area, including Boston. Our mission is to promote smart growth and regional collaboration, but around that we provide kind of a broad range of services, everything from sustainable land use, environmental planning, transportation, to stuff like economic development, municipal management, public health. We've sort of an overarching guiding principle around advancing equity and cultural competency, both internally and our work throughout the region. We also do a lot of collective purchasing, everything from fire trucks and police cars to bike racks. Mostly recently we've moved into doing this for energy-related services, and that's a large part of what I'll talk about in terms of our solar initiative.
It's great to hear about all the different aspects that you guys get into. Okay, well, the next question is, MAPC has had a long history of leadership in the Boston region for municipalities on regional issues. How did MAPC become involved in this solar energy discussion?
Yeah, sure. So we started doing energy work probably a couple years ago now at the request of our member cities and towns, sort of in the wake of stimulus funding, and also Massachusetts has a lot of programs and policies focused on helping communities enter into the green era. We started to get a lot of questions and requests for support on that subject more generally. So that's kind of started off us moving into the energy space in general. In terms of solar energy in particular, that was something that a lot of our member cities and towns were interested in. MAPC and also Massachusetts has a big focus on promoting renewable energy development. So this began with, we had a number of cities and towns that we were working with to do a preliminary feasibility study. And basically how we did that is we just found a couple communities that had sites that they were interested in looking at and put that out to bid and got some preliminary studies on that. But once that program was done and all of them had these reports on whether or not those sites had fatal flaws and whether they could move forward, we started to think about, well, what would it take to actually move these projects forward. So another thing that we had done is we had already begun moving into the space of doing collective procurement for energy-related services. So we've done that for an ESCO, for performance contracting services in municipal facilities. Massachusetts has a certain type of regulation that allows you to procure these sorts of services all as one package together. It's kind of the streamlined mechanism that actually is really useful for moving projects forward, but is something that our member cities and towns weren't super familiar with. So we started kind of doing this on a group basis. And what we came to realize is that we could do this for solar projects as well. And there was some research that went into this. I spent a lot of time talking to developers, to owners agents, to consultants in this space, figuring out what's the best way to kind of aggregate group solar projects together and move them forward at the same time. And we thought about, would we have to set up an LLC? Would we have to secure financing? Like, what would our role be? And ultimately, we realized that what we could do is we could put all of these programs and all these projects out to bid all at once and have a developer take care of all of that. So that was kind of the brainstorming that went into it and eventually kind of turned into this program. We ended up hiring a consultant to help us with that, which I found to be really helpful for all of our projects, just so I can kind of learn from that experience. But they helped us put together bid documents. We kind of went around to our member cities and towns and said, hey, anybody who's thinking about doing solar, why don't you just opt into this? It's kind of an experiment. We don't have kind of a clear trajectory yet, but we'll help you out and we'll see if we can all figure this out together. So that turned into us kind of putting all these communities out to bid in this blanket, like, come in and tell us what you could do with these communities, look for all potential for solar, and come back with some sort of response. And so we went through that process, assembled a selection committee from the participating communities to read proposals, got, a huge response actually, and walked through that procurement process so that by the end of the year, we actually had a developer that the community selected that they're getting to move forward with now.
Okay, great. Another question, what benefits have you seen from MAPC's involvement in promoting and developing the solar framework for the Boston region?
So a large part of what we do in general, around clean energy, but around all of the work that we do, is serving in this role kind of a convener and a regional, clearinghouse for information. So I think the main role that really we played in this was bringing people together. You end up with a lot of folks working in communities, kind of out in the suburbs where they haven't necessarily thought about clean energy work all that much, and everyone's trying to do this for the first time, and they have a lot of questions, and it takes them a while to move forward with projects because, they're all kind of trying to do their research and figure out the best way to make projects happen. So what we do is we take all of these people and we put them in a room together so that they can talk it through. We provide some technical assistance. We bring a consultant to the room to kind of help them think through it. And that really builds confidence in these projects and makes people feel like they are getting answers to the questions that they need in order to push projects forward. So, we'll have things like we'll have workshops or roundtables where we'll talk about specific stages of the solar development and contracting process where people can kind of talk to each other and say, oh, hey, this worked for us. This is a challenge that we encountered. This is a question that my town manager had. And that in itself seems to provide a lot of value. Of course, we also do, by doing this procurement effort, there's the economies of scale by grouping these projects together. So, we got a ton of proposals back in response to this project. I think we got, maybe 14 responses, more than I think any of these projects would be able to attract on their own. And by kind of leveraging this group purchasing power, I think that gives us more influence just as a coalition, such that we can then be providing feedback on the vendor side of things, saying, we represent the demand side of things. This is what people are looking for. Here's how you could better respond in the future. Enacting that role to kind of drive the market on both sides of the table, I think, has been something that's been valuable for our group initiative.
Absolutely. What have been some challenges or lessons learned?
So, one thing I will say is this is the first time we've done anything like this. I think maybe it was the first time that anyone in the state had done something like this by putting out this a group solicitation. But it really was an experiment. We kind of, eventually decided, well, we'll just put it out and we'll see what we get back and see what happens. So, I think it's done fairly well, but there's definitely been some challenges. I think one of them, and this is a challenge anytime you're doing public procurement, especially with something new, is I think it was really hard for vendors to respond to the RFQ, the request for qualifications that we put out, just because we kind of put in everything that we thought we were looking for, but I think it was something that the vendor community hadn't seen before. And so one of the frustrating things we came up against is we had a number of proposals that came in that were great proposals, but they weren't responsive to all the requirements in the RFQ, and so we weren't even able to look at them. And that's always frustrating when that happens, and that's something that we try to figure out what went wrong so that we can fix it in the future and so it doesn't happen again. Another challenge that we came up against is, we had such a large group of communities and a large group of sites that the main question that ended up being kind of central to this process was, were we going to select one developer or were we going to select multiple companies? And that was a conversation that happened all through the process up until the point of selection, where ultimately we decided to go with one, I think largely for simplicity and also because there was, the municipalities after reviewing the proposals came up with a company that they very clearly wanted to work with. But I think that, that will remain to be seen, and, it's possible that, there are other models that would work for this, and we'll have to kind of just keep trying to see what will work best. But I think that's a question that hasn't yet been answered, and there are unique challenges associated with either configuration of working with, a single company to do all the work or working with a team of companies, and then you have to figure out how to delegate responsibilities. And I think that's a main question to ask and to continue asking yourself throughout a process like this.
What are MAPC's next steps for continuing to support solar in the region?
So what we found is the biggest challenge, I think, for moving these projects forward is yet to come. It's really in the individual contracts that these municipalities will sign as selected developer. The MAPC process kind of fulfills public procurement requirements. We ended up signing a memorandum of understanding with the developer saying you can go out and you can contract with these communities one by one. So that's kind of where we are now. But the process of signing what are, basically these energy management services contracts for solar that include, the developer installing and financing and maintaining the system, and the community buying the power and leasing the space. These are somewhat complex agreements that, again, there's not a whole lot of familiarity with them, and a large part of the project costs come in this beginning startup for legal review of these agreements and figuring out, what liabilities fall on the municipality, what risks do the developers assume. And so, as that's become more evident, one thing that I think the developer really wanted us to do was for MAPC to put out a single contract that everyone would agree on. But obviously, we had 17 cities and towns participating in this thing. That was not kind of a realistic thing to come up with. But on the other hand, I think we do kind of have this role now to facilitate those conversations. And so I'm anticipating that we put out a lot of guidance in terms of what everyone should be looking out for in these agreements, and key things to consider, and saying, if you want this level of assurance, your project's going to be a little bit more expensive, but you'll have less risk. And walking folks through that step, I think that's going to be sort of the biggest part of it. But in addition to kind of issuing maybe model contract documents or general guidance, a lot of this is kind of the in-person conversation. So I'm seeing us, supporting more roundtable kind of efforts as folks get to specific parts along the contracting phase, maybe putting all of their general counsels in one room to talk it out together, and serving in that role. I think probably will do that. We're also doing, more general educational workshops, and we have one coming in July with NARC and with the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center and the Department of Energy Resources, and I think are just trying to kind of consolidate all of our efforts to promote solar efforts in the public space.
Is there anything else that you would like to share with others interested in creating similar projects or programming?
Yeah, definitely. I think the things that have worked the best for me in terms of all of our clean energy projects is when you pair together these educational outreach efforts, which I think all of us are working hard to do, with an actual implementation item. And in our case, this is the collective procurement mechanism where, everyone comes together, they learn about the process, they learn about what it's going to take to move their projects forward. But then at the end of the project, they have now a vendor that they can work with. They have a next step, which is to sign a contract with them to actually move the project forward. And that's been for us delivering some tangible results, as opposed to folks coming to a conference or something, learning about something, but then not having a tangible next step, and so then nothing happens. And that's been a model that's worked really well for our projects, this sort of workshop / procurement vehicle. Fundamentally teaming together with groups of communities that are working on similar projects so that people can just talk to each other, that seems to be one of the biggest values that we provide. And I can sort of see the wheels turning in people's heads when they come into these rooms and start talking about things and saying, well, how did you fix this problem? And even if they're not actively engaged in, say, a solicitation through us, they may go out and, go back to their community and say, okay, this is what we figured out. I feel confident that we can now move forward in this way because it's working over here. And then one final thing is, especially when you're moving into a new space like this, dealing with a new technology or a new type of project, I've found the vendor community to be really helpful on this. And certainly, as I was preparing to set this up, I talked to a lot of developers, learned about how they do business, so that I could better kind of explain that to them, the communities. This is what you should be looking for. These are what these people do. And I think, in general, they're really happy to provide that resource. And then as a public entity, we're in a good position to then share that information in an unbiased way. And that's, I would say that's incredibly valuable. Don't go into this blind. Know who you're going to be working with and the sort of things that they do.
Yeah, it's just all great information. Where can listeners find out more on your activities?
So I would direct folks to the MAPC website at mapc.org. We have a section for our clean energy projects, which is kept pretty up to date, and then they can always reach out to me.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Helen.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening. For more information about NARC, please visit narc.org. This podcast was brought to you by the Sunshot Solar Outreach Partnership, funded by the U.S. Department of Energy to increase the use and integration of solar energy in communities across the U.S. For more information on the Sunshot Solar Outreach Partnership, visit our website at www.solaroutreach.org or find us on ICMA's Knowledge Network at www.icma.org/solar.